stop right there, because what happened on this flight will completely change the way you think about judgment, power, and respect forever. A black CEO walks onto a luxury first-class flight, dressed simply calm, unbothered, just another passenger in the eyes of everyone around him. But within seconds, everything changes. A flight attendant looks him up and down and says the words that instantly shift the entire atmosphere. "Sir, you don't belong here." And just like that, a billionaire CEO is questioned, embarrassed, and publicly pushed out his own seat in front of dozens of passengers. People start whispering, phones start recording, and nobody stops it, not even when he shows his ticket, not even when the proof is right there. Instead, he is told to move to economy, like he is nothing. And shockingly, he agrees. He walks away quietly. No argument, no anger, no drama. But what nobody on that flight realizes is this one decision is the beginning of something massive. Because while they think they've handled the situation, he is sitting quietly in the back of the plane, opening his laptop, making a phone call that no one hears. And within 30 minutes, everything changes. The same crew who humiliated him will be standing frozen in shock. The same passengers who stayed silent will realize they witnessed a huge mistake. And the same flight attendant who said, "You don't belong here," will regret those words for the rest of her life. Because this man is not just a passenger. He is the owner of the airline. And what happens after landing is something no one on that plane ever expected. People will lose their jobs. The truth will explode publicly. And one decision based on assumption will destroy careers in minutes. But here's the real question. Why didn't anyone believe him when he showed his ticket? Why did they judge him in seconds without knowing who he really was? And what happens when power quietly sits among the, "Sir, you don't belong here"? The sharp words slice through the quiet luxury of the first-class cabin, turning several heads at once. Marcus Reed paused beside seat 2A, gripping the handle of his black leather briefcase. For a brief second, the entire cabin seemed frozen around him. The early morning flight from New York to Los Angeles was filling quickly. Soft jazz played to the overhead speakers while passengers settled into wide leather seats, sipping coffee and scrolling through phones. Flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisle, preparing the cabin for departure. Marcus had boarded quietly, hoping for a peaceful flight. At 38 years old, he had learned to appreciate silence. His life rarely allowed it anymore. As founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing technology investment firms in the country, his schedule was packed with meetings, negotiations, and constant travel. Yet today, he looked nothing like the powerful businessman many magazines featured on their covers. He wore dark jeans, clean sneakers, and a charcoal hoodie beneath a simple jacket. No expensive jewelry, no designer luggage, no visible signs of wealth. To most people, he looked like an exhausted traveler trying to catch some sleep. Marcus glanced at his boarding pass. Seat 2A. First class. He had chosen the seat carefully. It was near the front and offered enough space to review confidential documents before landing in Los Angeles. Just as he lifted his bag toward the overhead compartment, a voice stopped him. "Excuse me, sir." Marcus turned. A flight attendant stood in the aisle with her arms crossed neatly across a uniform. Her name tag read Linda. She offered a professional smile, but something about her expression felt unusually cold. "Yes," Marcus asked politely. Linda pointed toward the back of the aircraft. "Economy seating is that way." Marcus blinked. For a second, he thought she might be joking. "I'm sorry. Coach is in the rear cabin," she repeated. Marcus looked down at his ticket again, and then back at her. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." He held out the boarding pass. "This is my assigned seat." Linda barely looked at it. Instead, she glanced toward the growing line of boarding passengers waiting behind Marcus. "Sir, we're trying to board quickly." Her voice remained calm, but impatience was already slipping through. Marcus kept his tone respectful. "And I'm trying to sit in my seat." A few nearby passengers began watching. A middle-aged man in a Navy business suit looked up from his laptop. A woman across the aisle lowered her sunglasses. The tension had become impossible to ignore. Linda finally took the boarding pass. She examined it for less than 2 seconds. Then her eyebrows tightened. That can't be right. Marcus remained still. It is. Linda looked him up and down again, not at the ticket, at him. Her eyes paused briefly on his hoodie and sneakers. Marcus knew that look. He had seen it before, years ago, when he first began building his company. He attended investor meetings where security guards assumed he was delivering food. At luxury hotels, staff sometimes handed him luggage carts instead of room keys. Success had changed his bank account. It had not erased assumptions. Linda lowered her voice slightly. Sir, first-class passengers usually board through priority confirmation. Marcus frowned. I did. She shook her head. There may have been an error. Marcus pointed calmly at the seat number. 2A. Passengers nearby were openly listening now. The businessman cleared his throat. If that's his ticket, Linda interrupted before he could finish. We'll handle it. Her smile disappeared. The warmth in her voice disappeared too. Please step aside while we verify your information. Marcus noticed several passengers studying him. Some looked curious. Others looked uncomfortable. And a few looked as though they had already chosen sides. He felt heat rise inside his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just the exhausting feeling of being questioned over something already proven. Still, Marcus stepped slightly into the aisle. He had no interest in creating a scene. Linda waved toward another crew member. A younger flight attendant approached. His name tag read Kyle. What's going on? He asked. Linda tilted her head toward Marcus. He's trying to sit in first class. The sentence landed heavily. Trying. Not assigned. Not booked. Trying. Marcus noticed a subtle difference immediately. Kyle glanced toward him and then toward the boarding pass. Marcus offered it again. Kyle studied the ticket more carefully than Linda had. For a moment, his face showed uncertainty. But before he could speak, Linda leaned closer. These fake upgrades happen all the time. The comment made several passengers whisper. Marcus slowly lowered his hand. His patience was beginning to thin. There's nothing fake about my ticket, he said calmly. Kyle hesitated. Well, Linda stepped forward again. Sir, if you purchase an economy seat and there was confusion online, customer service can help after landing. Marcus stared at her. Her words surprised him less than her certainty. She had already decided he did not belong, and now she was searching for reasons to justify it. The businessman across the aisle shook his head. Just check the system, he muttered. But Linda ignored him. Marcus inhaled slowly. He could feel dozens of eyes on him now. The entire first-class cabin had become an audience. His fingers tightened around the briefcase handle. He had spent years mastering control. Control over frustration. Control over ego. Control over moments exactly like this. I paid for this seat, Marcus said evenly. Linda folded her arms. And I'm asking you to cooperate. The air between them grew heavier. Passengers in the boarding line stretched their necks to see. Phones quietly appeared. Some recorded. Others simply watched. Marcus suddenly remembered something his late father used to say. People often decide who you are before you ever speak. He hated how true those words still felt. Marcus glanced once more at seat 2A. The seat he had legally purchased. The seat waiting only inches away. Then he looked back at Linda. Her expression hadn't softened. If anything, she looked more determined. And deep down, Marcus realized the situation was no longer about seating. It was about assumption, about judgment, and about whether he would quietly accept humiliation to make others comfortable. The cabin had gone almost silent when Linda reached for the intercom phone. Her voice became formal. The atmosphere inside first class changed the moment Linda requested gate supervision. The soft music, the polite smiles, the luxury of the cabin. Everything suddenly felt tense. Marcus Reed stood quietly beside seat 2A while boarding continued around him. Passengers squeezed past with carry-on bags, but many slowed down just enough to watch. Nobody said much, but the look said enough. Some were curious, some looked uncomfortable, and a few had already made silent judgments. Linda remained planted in the aisle, standing between Marcus and the seat he had paid for. We'll sort this out shortly, she said. Her tone sounded professional, but there was something sharp underneath it. Marcus kept his briefcase beside him and nodded once. I'm sure we will. Inside, frustration was building, not because of the delay, not even because of the embarrassment. What exhausted him most was how familiar this felt. He had faced moments like this before, not always this openly, but often enough to recognize the pattern. People assuming, questioning, doubting, especially before they knew who he was. A few rows away, a young woman quietly whispered to her husband, "Did they overbook first class?" Her husband shrugged. "Maybe." The businessman across the aisle closed his laptop and watched with growing irritation. "If the man has a ticket, what's the issue?" he asked. Linda forced a smile. "Sir, we're handling it." Marcus appreciated the stranger speaking up, but he said nothing. Years of leadership had taught him that not every battle required raised voices. Sometimes calm revealed more than anger ever could. A few minutes later, the gate supervisor arrived. His name tag read Mark Collins. He looked rushed and slightly annoyed, carrying the tired expression of someone trying to solve problems quickly before departure. "What seems to be the issue?" Mark asked. Linda answered immediately. "This passenger is refusing seating instructions." Marcus looked at her. Refusing? That was not what happened. But before he could respond, Mark extended his hand. "Boarding pass, sir." Marcus handed it over. Mark studied the ticket carefully, and for a brief second, his expression changed. His eyes landed on the details. Marcus read, "Seat 2A, first class." The answer was obvious. Marcus saw it. Kyle saw it too. Even the businessman nearby noticed. The ticket was valid. The mistake should have ended there. But something unexpected happened. Mark looked toward the crowded aisle behind them. Boarding had slowed. Passengers were waiting. Tension was rising. And instead of correcting the problem immediately, he made a different choice. One that felt easier. One that avoided conflict. He lowered the boarding pass. "Sir," he said carefully, "perhaps we can relocate you temporarily." Marcus frowned. "Relocate me? Premium economy has available seating." Marcus stared at him. "I purchased first class." "Yes, but we don't want to delay departure over misunderstanding." The words landed hard. Misunderstanding. Marcus felt disappointment settle in his chest. There was no misunderstanding, only a refusal to admit one. The businessman leaned forward again. "But his ticket says—" Mark interrupted politely. "We appreciate your patience, sir." Then he turned back to Marcus. "We'll investigate after landing." Marcus looked around the cabin. Dozens of eyes watched him now. Some passengers avoided eye contact. Others openly stared. A teenager near the aisle held his phone low, clearly recording. The humiliation was no longer private. It had become public entertainment. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He thought about the long week behind him, the sleepless nights, the high-stakes meetings waiting in Los Angeles. And now this, all because someone looked at him and decided he didn't belong. He spoke calmly. "So your solution is asking me to surrender the seat I paid for?" Mark sighed. "Sir, we're simply trying to move things along." Linda folded her arms. "And we need your cooperation." The word cooperation irritated Marcus more than he expected. He had cooperated. He showed his ticket. He remained respectful. He answered every question. Yet somehow he had become the problem. A woman seated near the window finally spoke. "That doesn't seem fair." Linda answered quickly. "Ma'am, please remain seated." The woman looked away, uncomfortable. Marcus noticed Kyle, watching quietly from behind Linda. For a moment, the younger attendant looked unsure, as though part of him knew something felt wrong. But he said nothing. That silence disappointed Marcus too, because silence often protected unfairness. Mark glanced toward the boarding door. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice, "if this escalates, airport security may become involved." The cabin fell quiet. Security. The word carried weight. Several passengers exchanged nervous looks. Marcus felt something cold settle inside him. Not fear, just clarity. He understood exactly what was happening. The threat was not about policy. It was pressure. Pressure to comply. Pressure to stop making others uncomfortable. Pressure to quietly accept what never should have happened. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then Marcus surprised everyone. He picked up his briefcase. The businessman looked shocked. "You're giving up your seat?" Marcus looked toward him. "No," he said quietly. "I'm choosing my peace." The cabin remained silent. Linda looked relieved. Mark relaxed visibly. Marcus stepped away from seat 2A and followed Mark toward premium economy. As he walked down the aisle, whispers followed behind him. Some passengers looked sympathetic. Others looked confused. And a few appeared convinced that the crew must have been right. That part hurt most. How quickly people believed authority over evidence. Mark stopped beside a premium economy seat. This should be comfortable enough. Comfortable enough. Marcus nearly smiled at the phrase. He placed his briefcase beneath the seat and sat down without complaint. Linda passed by moments later. "Thank you for cooperating," she said. Her smile returned, but it didn't feel kind. It felt victorious. Marcus simply nodded. Then he opened his laptop. No argument, no anger, no dramatic protest, just silence. But beneath that silence, something had changed. Because while the crew believed the situation was finished, they had no idea who Marcus Reed truly was. And in less than 30 minutes, the entire balance of power inside that aircraft was about to shift forever. The aircraft climbed steadily above the clouds, leaving New York behind. Inside the cabin, the tension from boarding slowly faded. Passengers settled into their routines. Seatbelts loosened. Laptop screens opened. The low hum of engines blended with soft conversations and the clinking of coffee cups. To most people on board, the incident involving Marcus Reed was already forgotten. First class returned to comfort. Linda chatted with another attendant near the galley, while Kyle organized beverage carts. A few passengers laughed softly over morning drinks, acting as though nothing unusual had happened. But Marcus remembered. He sat quietly in premium economy, his expression unreadable. The downgraded seat was narrower than first class, with barely enough room to stretch his legs. His shoulders brushed the armrest whenever he shifted. Still, he said nothing. He placed his briefcase beneath the seat and opened his laptop with calm precision. From the outside, he looked like any professional traveler catching up on work. But behind the glow of that screen sat a man carrying responsibilities far larger than anyone on board could imagine. Marcus adjusted his glasses and opened a secure folder. Dozens of documents appeared: financial reports, executive contracts, confidential agreements, and one file marked Skybridge Acquisition Final Authorization. His eyes rested on the title for a moment. 8 months. That was how long the negotiations had taken. 8 exhausting months of legal reviews, board meetings, financial risk assessments, and private discussions. Very few people knew the truth. Skybridge Airlines, once a respected airline, had quietly entered serious financial trouble. Rising operational costs and poor executive decisions had pushed the company dangerously close to collapse. Publicly, the airline denied problems. Privately, executives were desperate. Marcus had seen opportunity where others saw failure. His investment company specialized in rebuilding struggling businesses. He believed companies could recover if leadership changed and people were treated with respect. That belief was why he had spent months negotiating this deal. And today mattered more than anyone realized. Because by the time this aircraft landed in Los Angeles, ownership papers would be finalized. Skybridge Airlines would belong largely to his investment group. Marcus leaned back slightly. Ironically, he had booked this flight himself without informing airline staff who he was. No special treatment, no executive escort, no publicity. He preferred it that way. Titles often changed how people behaved. Money changed conversations. Power changed smiles. Marcus valued honesty more than luxury. He preferred seeing people as they truly were. And today, unfortunately, he had seen enough. He thought about Linda's expression, the certainty in her voice, the way she looked him up and down before checking his ticket. He replayed the moment she said, "He's trying to sit in first class." Not assigned. Trying. The word still lingered. Marcus rubbed his temple. His anger had cooled into something quieter. Disappointment. Not because he lost a seat, but because dignity had become negotiable. He remembered his mother telling him stories from his childhood. She worked double shifts as a nurse while raising him alone. Whenever Marcus came home discouraged after being underestimated at school, she would sit beside him and say, "People may judge you in seconds, but character reveals itself over time." Back then, he barely understood those words. Now he understood them perfectly. A flight attendant pushed a beverage cart down the aisle. It was Kyle. The younger crew member looked more relaxed than during boarding. When he reached Marcus, his smile appeared forced. "Drink, sir?" Marcus looked up from his screen. "Just water, please." Kyle handed him the bottle. For a brief second, he hesitated, almost as if he wanted to say something. Maybe apologize. Maybe explain. But instead, he simply nodded. Marcus accepted the water. "Thank you." Kyle moved on. The interaction lasted seconds, yet Marcus noticed something. Kyle avoided eye contact. Guilt, perhaps, or uncertainty. Meanwhile, up in first class, Linda laughed with another attendant. Marcus could hear fragments of conversation drifting from a galley. Nothing serious, just casual workplace chatter. To them, the issue had ended. The difficult passenger had moved. The cabin was peaceful again. Case closed. Marcus returned his attention to the laptop. An encrypted message flashed on screen. Board approval confirmed. Final transfer pending executive signature. He checked the time. 30 minutes since departure. Right on schedule. He closed the message and reached for his phone. This call mattered, not because he wanted revenge, and certainly not because of pride. Marcus believed in professionalism, but he also believed accountability mattered. He dialed a private number. The call connected almost instantly. A calm voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." Marcus lowered his voice. "Good morning, Sandra." Sandra Whitmore served as chief legal advisor for the acquisition team. She rarely wasted words. "Everything finalized?" she asked. Marcus looked out the window briefly. Clouds stretched endlessly beneath the aircraft. "Yes," he said. "Any updates?" "The board completed approval 10 minutes ago." Marcus nodded. "Good." Sandra continued. "Executive transition becomes official upon digital confirmation." Marcus glanced again toward first class. Linda remained near the galley, smiling as she arranged glasses. Still unaware, still comfortable, still convinced she had handled things correctly. Marcus spoke calmly. "I'd like executive operations placed on standby." A short pause followed. Sandra understood immediately. "Something happened?" Marcus considered the question, then answered carefully. "Document the flight crew involved with passenger operations." Her voice sharpened. "I understand." No dramatic explanation. No emotional speech. Just instructions. Because Marcus never made decisions while angry. He made them while clear. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, he set the phone down quietly. Across the aisle, a passenger noticed his serious expression and returned to reading. Nobody suspected anything unusual. Nobody knew the man sitting quietly in premium economy was hours away from becoming the airline's most powerful stakeholder. Marcus closed his laptop halfway and looked toward first class again. The irony almost made him smile. They had judged him by appearance, by clothing, by assumptions. The flight was cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet when everything inside the cockpit changed in an instant. To the passengers, the aircraft felt calm. Engines hummed steadily. The sky outside was bright and endless. Service in the cabin had resumed normally, with trays being collected and drinks offered. But inside the cockpit, something far more serious was unfolding. Captain Reynolds sat in his seat, reviewing flight data, when the cockpit phone suddenly rang. He picked it up casually at first. Captain Reynolds speaking. There was a pause. Then the tone on the other end of the line shifted his entire focus. It wasn't airline operations. It wasn't routine coordination. It was headquarters. And the message was urgent. The captain straightened in his seat. "Yes, I understand," he said slowly. His co-pilot noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked under her breath. The captain raised a hand slightly, signaling for silence. He listened again. Then his expression tightened. "Repeat that," he said firmly into phone. A longer pause followed. The voice from headquarters clarified everything in a controlled but serious tone. A major corporate transition had just been finalized. Ownership restructuring, emergency executive confirmation, and effective immediately, a new majority stakeholder had taken control influence over operational oversight. The captain's eyes narrowed. "This is active right now?" he asked. "Yes," came a reply. "And the individual is on board your aircraft." The cockpit went silent. Even the hum of instruments felt louder. The captain slowly leaned forward. "Do we have a name?" Another pause. Then the answer came. Marcus Reed. The captain froze for half a second. He turned slightly toward the flight manifest screen. Passenger list displayed in front of him. And there it was. Marcus Reed. Seat assignment. Originally to A. Currently located in premium economy. The captain's expression changed immediately. Not panic. Concern. Because now he understood the gravity of the situation. This was not just a corporate announcement. This was a live, in-progress incident involving a key executive figure tied directly to ownership authority. And something about the information didn't add up. The captain lowered his voice. Confirmed passenger was properly identified during boarding. There was hesitation on the line. Then the response. Negative report noted from cabin service regarding seating dispute. The captain's jaw tightened. He ended the call without another word. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the console. His co-pilot spoke again. "Captain," he exhaled slowly. "We have a problem." Without wasting another second, Captain Reynolds stood up and exited the cockpit. He moved quickly but controlled, walking down the narrow aisle toward the cabin. A senior flight attendant noticed him immediately. "Captain, is everything okay?" "Where's the lead crew member?" he asked sharply. Linda appeared almost instantly, adjusting her uniform as she approached. "Yes, Captain?" His eyes locked onto her. "Where's the passenger assigned to seat 2A?" Linda hesitated. "The passenger was moved?" she asked. The captain's expression hardened slightly. "He was moved?" "Yes," she said quickly. There was confusion with seating. So he was relocated to premium economy to avoid delay. The moment those words left her mouth, the captain's face changed. Not anger. Something worse. Realization. He turned without responding and walked directly toward premium economy. His pace increased. Passengers noticed. Something about a captain moving to the cabin with purpose always draws attention. Whispers began almost instantly. "Is there a problem? Did something happen?" Marcus looked up from his seat just as the captain approached. Their eyes met. The captain stopped. For a brief moment, everything around them faded. Noise, movement, even the aircraft itself seemed distant. "Mr. Reed," the captain said respectfully. Marcus closed his laptop slowly. "Yes." "I need to speak with you privately," the captain said. That alone caught attention. Passengers nearby leaned in slightly. The tone was different now. Formal, respectful, almost apologetic. Marcus stood without hesitation. The captain gestured toward a quieter area near the front of the cabin. As they walked, the atmosphere shifted again. Passengers who had previously ignored Marcus now watched him carefully. Something had changed. Something they didn't understand yet. They reached the front section of the cabin. The captain lowered his voice. "Mr. Reed, I want to sincerely apologize for what has occurred on board." Marcus studied him calmly. "Apologize for what exactly?" he asked. The captain hesitated. Not because he didn't know, but because saying it out loud made it real. "For the seating situation," he finally said. Marcus nodded slightly. "I understand." The captain continued carefully. "There's been misunderstanding in cabin operations." Marcus looked at him directly. "Was there a misunderstanding with my ticket?" he asked. The question hung in the air. The captain didn't answer immediately, because the truth was simple. There had been no misunderstanding, only a failure in judgment. Before he could respond, Linda appeared a few steps behind, clearly anxious now. "Captain, He raised a hand to stop her. Not harshly, but firmly. "Not now." The cabin fell silent again. Passengers sensed tension building. Something serious was unfolding. The captain finally spoke again. Mr. Reed, headquarters, has issued an executive notification. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Go on. The captain swallowed. Ownership transition has been finalized. A pause. Then the next words came slower. And you are listed as a majority stakeholder. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unreal. A few nearby passengers overheard fragments. Stakeholder? Ownership. What does that mean? Marcus didn't react immediately. He simply looked at the captain, then slowly turned his head toward first class, toward Linda, toward the crew who had questioned him. The realization began to spread across the cabin in waves. Whispers started. Confusion grew. And for the first time since boarding, Linda looked uncertain, because the man she had just moved out of first class was no longer just a passenger. He was now the authority the airline would answer to. And the captain, standing beside him, already understood what that meant for everything that had happened on this flight. The cabin felt completely different now. What had been a normal flight minutes ago had turned into something no one could quite process. Passengers sat frozen in their seats, watching the front of the cabin like they were witnessing a scene from a movie. The soft hum of the engines continued, but inside the aircraft, silence had taken over in a way that felt almost unnatural. Marcus Reed stood calmly beside the captain. No raised voice, no anger, no dramatic reaction, just stillness. But that stillness carried more weight than any outburst could have. Captain Reynolds cleared his throat slightly, fully aware that every word mattered now. Mr. Reed, he said carefully, headquarters had confirmed the final stage of the acquisition. Marcus nodded once. I've been informed. The captain continued, lowering his voice even further. And operational authority has been updated to reflect your position as majority stakeholder. A wave of quiet shock moved through nearby passengers who could hear fragments of the conversation. Some leaned forward. Some exchanged confused looks. Others simply stared, trying to understand what they were hearing. Marcus finally spoke. Thank you for confirming. His tone remained controlled, almost calm enough to feel unsettling. Then he turned slightly. His eyes moved across the cabin. First class, the same section where he had been denied moments earlier. And finally, his gaze settled on Linda. She stood near the aisle, her face pale now. The confidence she had carried during boarding was gone. Completely gone. Kyle stood a step behind her, visibly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Linda swallowed hard. Sir, I didn't realize. Marcus raised a hand gently. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't interrupt harshly. But the gesture alone stopped her mid-sentence. I know, he said quietly. Those two words hit harder than anger ever could, because they weren't filled with blame. They were filled with clarity. Marcus continued. You didn't ask who I was before deciding where I belonged. The cabin was so quiet now that even small movements felt loud. Linda's lips parted, but no words came out. The captain stood still, watching carefully. Marcus didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, and that made the moment heavier. He glanced at the first-class seats again. The same seat he had paid for. The same seat he was told he didn't belong in. Then he looked back at Linda. I don't need special treatment, he said. I never did. A pause. I only needed fairness. Those words settled across the cabin like a heavy truth. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the passengers who had watched silently during boarding now looked uncomfortable, because everyone understood what had happened. Not just an error, not just a misunderstanding, but judgment, based on appearance, based on assumption, based on bias. Captain Reynolds finally spoke. Mr. Reed, we will conduct a full internal investigation into this incident. Marcus nodded slightly. I expect that you do. His tone remained steady, not demanding, just certain. Then he added something that changed the energy again. And I expect the standards of this airline to reflect dignity for every passenger moving forward. The captain lowered his head slightly. Yes, sir. A long silence followed. No one interrupted it, not even the crew, because everyone understood that something irreversible had just happened. The aircraft continued its flight, but inside, everything had shifted. Linda stood still, her hands trembling slightly now. The reality was setting in. Her decisions during boarding had not just caused embarrassment. They had consequences far beyond a single flight. Marcus finally stepped back, not in anger, not in revenge, but in closure. He returned to his seat in premium economy and picked up his briefcase. The captain watched him for a moment, then spoke quietly. "Mr. Reed, would you like to return to first class?" For the first time, Marcus allowed a faint pause. Then he shook his head. No. He looked out the window. Clouds stretched endlessly below. Peaceful, quiet. "Keep it as it is," he said, because this was no longer about a seat. It was about a message, about how quickly people decide who belongs where, and how quickly those decisions can collapse when truth finally speaks. After landing in Los Angeles, the atmosphere inside the airport was completely different. Executives from Skybridge Airlines were already waiting. The incident report had been escalated, footage reviewed, crew statements collected. Within hours, disciplinary actions were initiated against multiple staff involved in the seating incident, including Linda and Kyle, pending formal termination review for violation of passenger respect and discrimination policies. News of the event spread quickly through internal channels, but Marcus never celebrated it. Instead, in a private meeting with airline leadership, he spoke only once more. "This is not about punishment," he said calmly. "It's about preventing this from happening again." And just like that, the story that began with humiliation ended with accountability. Not because Marcus raised his voice, but because the truth eventually reached the place it always does, the top,